Welcome to the Master Your Mix podcast, helping engineers, producers, and artists create professional recordings and mixes, even from home. I'm your host, Mike and Davina. Let's get started. Hey, welcome to the Master Your Mix podcast. My name is Mike and Davina, and thanks for hanging out with me today. If my voice sounds weird, it's because I've been fighting a cold today, so that's always fun. But hey, we're gonna get through this. Anyway, today my guest is Brad Boatright, and if you're not familiar with Brad is a mastering engineer and owner of Audiosiege. And Brad has quite a wide range of projects that he's worked on. He's most well known in the punk and hardcore and metal scene, but he's done a lot of different projects, everything from working on the Stranger Things soundtrack to then working on the reissue of Sleep's monumental Dopesmoker LP, and he's also done records with Corrosion of Conformity, Nails, Obituary, Yob, and a whole bunch of other great artists as well. And in today's episode, we get into a lot of talk all about the process of mastering albums and all of the challenges that come along with mastering records as opposed to mastering singles. And also we talk a lot about incorporating analog gear into the workflow as well, and how to combine that with digital technology to make sure that you're working efficiently, but also still getting great sound and not sacrificing any of the quality. And Brad is very thorough about his process, and he goes into great depth about what he uses and what order he puts everything in. I think you're going to find this really helpful if you're someone who's really interested in learning more about the signal chains when it comes to mastering. And then he also gets into some really cool stuff about how he uses digital plugins to help him with making sure that all of his analog gear is calibrated and that whenever he does recalls, everything is exact. And you know, sometimes analog gear, it can be a little finicky, right? Sometimes one day it might work a certain way and the next day it might sound a little different. And Brad talks all about that. He even talks about how he uses it to make sure that his plugins are calibrated, because as you'll hear in this episode, he found out a couple plugins just weren't quite working the same way next time he used them. So this is all really interesting stuff. And I think that when you're in the world of mastering, or even if you're in mixing, you want to make sure that you're doing consistent work, and especially when it comes to recalls. So a lot of this consistency stuff that he talks about here is very, very important. So yeah, I think you're going to find it really interesting, really fascinating. So with that said, let's just jump right into it. Brad Boatright, thank you so much for being on the Master Your Mix podcast. How's it going, man?
It's going great. Thanks for having me.
For people who might not be familiar with you, can you give us a little background on who you are, what you do, how you ultimately got into everything that you're working on these days?
I'm just a guy. Grew up, was fortunate to be born in the mid 70s, and a great time in North Mississippi, just like an hour south of Memphis. And God, I'm starting from the beginning, right?
Go for it. Yeah.
So, I'm how I got into things. I've always been into music, and I just remember like being a kid and like listening to Rock 103 from Memphis, and it was a classic rock station. You know, they'd play like Led Zeppelin and Boston, Rush, AC/DC, and all this stuff. And I had a cassette deck in my room when I really started getting into it. And like, I remember one time I was like out on a drive with my dad doing something like, going out and cutting wood or something. And he's like, you got to tap your foot to the beat with radio songs. I'm like, oh, that's cool. Like, tap you to the, like you get involved physically. And this is music that's like, I later learned like the music is actually physically affecting, membranes that are creating these electrical pulses in your brain, like it's just a very physical thing to me, and a very like enveloping, process for me. So I got into music like really early, at a great time in a great place, if that makes sense. And when I was, in my early teens, I discovered punk and metal. And I just remember like blasting like Metallica and Justice for All, and then like, Rudimentary Peni and Discharge, and just being like, man, like I'd come home from school, like just frustrated because I felt like I didn't fit in or something. And I'd just put on a record, and I'd just be like, wow, like this is doing it. And going back to the cassette thing, I had a cassette deck in my room when I was younger, and I would record songs on the radio. So like I had all these songs where the beginning is like cut off just a little bit, because I'm like, oh, what is this? Like like Time by Pink Floyd, you know, I'm like, oh wait, this is, you know, or like, I remember there was like specifically like Pink Floyd, Boston, Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap by AC/DC on that one, like Rush, Spirit Radio, ironically. And so yeah, so like I went in, I was, you know, got into punk and metal in my teens, and I just, you know, like back then it was like small town. If you didn't follow a certain path, it was like you kind of felt different and you felt like an outcast. And some of that might have been imposed, some of that might have been, you know, imagined, but like it was not really like, it was not much of an escape beyond certain activities, if that makes sense. But music definitely was to me. And I wanted a guitar. My parents got me a guitar on my 15th birthday. They were incredibly supportive of playing guitar, of me playing guitar. And that's all I did. I would just play guitar. I would come home after school, play guitar. I would, you know, take my amp outside because we lived in the country, and just turn it. It was this little like just ratty little combo amp, and just turn it on and be like, yeah. But I would just play guitar and you know, learn songs, learn power chords and how the notes work together. And then I started playing music, and you know, it's like the Price is Right game. You know, what is it? Is it Plinko? You know, where the guy like falls, you know, and he's like, it's kind of like that. It's like there were all these pegs in life that just kind of made me like, you know, oh, I'm bouncing here, bouncing there, and a lot of lucky, you know, a lot of being in the right place at the right time and being prepared. But yeah, I started playing music and moved to, so I was in a band in Oxford, Mississippi when I was out of high school briefly. And that was with some older people who really got me into a lot of the music that I remained into. And then I moved to Murfreesboro, Tennessee, right outside of Nashville. That was kind of my ticket out. I was like, okay, I'm going to go study recording industry technology at Middle Tennessee State University. It's a big school for that. And because there was no program for that in Mississippi, I was able to go for in-state tuition on a Commonwealth. And this was in 97. And so it was, you know, it was right when, like, right on the verge of like recording technology being accessible to everyone for, you know, for a decent price, even though like ADATs were ridiculously expensive at the time, if you look back. And so I found that program was very saturated with people. It was very hard to get like hands-on experience. But I'd started another band. I started a band in Nashville, and you know, we ended up recording a lot of music and going on a lot of tours. And every time we would record, I'd be the person obsessed with the sound. You know, I would be the person like watching the moves, and like the person like trying out microphones on guitars. And, you know, even like playing live, it was like, okay, let's tilt one cabinet this way, tilt another, you know, and down the line, I kind of developed this philosophy that mastering in some ways is kind of like getting everybody on stage and in the right spot so that, that everybody can, or mixing more so, but so that everybody can hear them. But mastering is kind of like the full picture, you know, being out in the room and having everything work together and sound cohesive. So yeah, so sorry, I'm being very long-winded here, but that's basically like, yeah, that's the story.
That's cool. So it sounds like you kind of were like, you did go to school for this, but you were also very self-taught in a lot of ways with your, you know, like you said, going in the studio and auditioning a lot of different new techniques and stuff.
Yeah. And like, I mean, if it's any indication, like I tried to minor in philosophy while I was there. So that kind of sums it all up, you know, like it's, I don't know. I have kind of I'm esoteric to a fault at times, but yeah.
So these days you're focusing mainly on mastering work. What ultimately got you into mastering? Because a lot of people, they get into recording, you know, similar situation to you, or maybe it's like they want to record their band and then that leads to learning about mixing. And like a lot of people get focused on mixing and want to make a career out of that. But what got you ultimately to mastering?
So mastering, for one, it was like when I was a kid and everybody had the Nintendo Entertainment Center system, I wanted a Sega. You know, I always wanted to try like, well, maybe there's something else out there. Maybe there's like something different, you know? So, we would record records and send them off to be mastered and get them back. So we would record a record and everything would sound like, you know, like it wouldn't have that like finished sound. I don't think I really need to elaborate on that. It just wouldn't have that finished sound, you know, like there would be long gaps between the songs. There would be, you know, like guitars are a little low and bass is kind of loud, but the mix is fine. It sounds fine when you turn it up, but like at low volumes, it's inconsistent. So we would send things off to get mastered and they'd come back and we'd be like, holy shit, this sounds exactly like we intended it. You know, we would have instructions on the pauses between songs. It sounded like it was a record, right? And I was lucky to sit in on a cutting session with George Horn at Fantasy Studios in the Bay Area in '98, I believe. And just kind of watched him work and was like, this is really cool. It's kind of like magic, you know? And like, you know, having like working a job for a few months and then going on tour and putting my stuff in storage or sublet in my room and then coming back with like a couple $100. You know, I didn't have the budget to buy a bunch of microphones and a bunch, you know, and preamps and everything. And so I just kind of focused on learning how to work with mixed music and how to work with that process. And I found that it was very similar to how to the approach I would take, like setting up a stereo in my bedroom, you know, like it was just like, okay, move these things around a little bit here, a little bit there. And now everything sounds good no matter where I am, no matter how loud I turn it up.
Very cool. I love how you said like, you didn't have the budget to like buy all the mics and stuff like that. And then you got into mastering where every analog piece of mastering gear is like the most expensive thing ever.
Yeah, I know. I was able to start I was able to start doing that, you know, fully digital.
Of course. Yeah. And I think that's how most people start these days with it. It's so much more affordable to get into it that way for sure.
Yeah.
And also, as we were talking about before we hit record, like the technology is just getting so good that like, you know, it's almost, you don't need all that analog gear necessarily to get the great results and get that good analog kind of sound.
Yeah, that
to some degree, maybe.
Being said, so there are a few pieces of gear that I cannot match in the box. And I like my Massive Passive, for example, like the plug-in version's fine, but like there's something that does there's like some kind of phase shift or some little magic dust that it sprinkles to audio that I just can't recreate digitally. And for me, more than anything, like I sometimes will do, you know, an analog pass and a digital pass for people just to, you know, and I find the digital version always takes me longer to dial in. So for me, like, it's really a workflow thing and knowing my gear, like I was talking about earlier, like just really knowing the gear and knowing how it works, the synergy of all these pieces. What's difficult to model digitally these days is impedance interactions between pieces of gear. You know, you can model a circuit all day long of two pieces, but how those pieces react and the relationship that they create and develop, you know, like that's something that I think is kind of difficult to do. And I'm not a coder, so who knows, I might be talking out of my ass, but like, it's just having like an analog chain that I know and having like everything kind of in order in a patch bay that I can like push inserts here and stuff. I just kind of know what, like when I start a master, I pull up I patch everything in and, you know, kind of go from there. I have kind of like not a one size fits all, but like a good basic starting point with my gear. And I can immediately know it's not going to need this. It's not going to need that, or I should use this. It makes me work much faster that way. So for me, it's a workflow thing more than anything.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Well, speaking of that workflow, I'd love to know, like, when you start mastering a project, what's typically your mindset going into? Like, how do you start? Where do you start? What are you listening for?
So one of the first things I do is, let's say it's a full length record. One of the first things I do is I go and I've got a form and I read the notes regarding, the best question I can ask anybody is, are you happy with the mix? And that's the most important thing I ask, because that tells me if I need to be, it tells me not how much work I need to do, but it tells me what, it gives me my approach. And so then I look for sequencing instructions, right? So if people want crossfades, if people want certain gaps. But what I really do is I kind of check out all the songs, see how cohesive the mix itself is, see if there are some songs that need a little bit different approach than others. That's not the case a lot of times. And I'll talk about that a little more in a minute. Remind me, because there's something I want to mention. But what I'll typically do is I'll go in and I'll get my analog gear patched in. I'll get my gain staging kind of where it needs to be. And I'll go in and I'll start sequencing it first. Because what I want to do is I want to start hearing it as a record. And I want to start hearing it like song ends and I'm timing the gap, right? Like I'm like, okay, this song needs to fade out and take a breath before the next one starts. This song needs to just come right into the next one, right? So I'll start counting stuff out before I'm even really making any musical decisions. As I'm doing that, I might twist a knob here and there, and by the time I'm done and ready to listen to it as a record, it's my work is like kind of just happens at that point. So the first thing I want to do is just kind of hear it like the band wants to hear it, or like I, as a listener, would want to hear it. Mm-hmm. Going back to the songs, like certain songs being way different than others. Like sometimes that'll be noted if, like, I will, in my intake form, I ask who the tracking engineer was, who the mixing engineer was, if different than the tracking engineer, et cetera. Sometimes they will note that, like, oh, there's two different mixes here. There's like, we did these 3 songs with this person and these 3 with another. But I can't stress enough how important file like naming conventions are, because when I unzip a mix and like one song's in all caps and it's like, 01, and then this mix 2, another one's, the next 3 are numbered, and then there's one in lowercase, and then another one is like capitalized case. It immediately tells me, okay, these are probably different sounding mixes here. And a lot of times I'm right. So, it's file naming conventions are something I'm really kind of picky with, because if they're all the same, if all the mixes are the same, then I see that, and in my brain I'm thinking, okay, this is going to take a different approach on these songs. But then I find later, oh, okay, maybe not, but I'm already prepared for it.
Yeah, I love that. That's so true. The file name thing, like, yeah, whenever you see that, just know, okay, there's no way these are going to be consistent. Yeah.
Yeah. And by the way, it's really funny, because as a mastering engineer, you get to see everybody's working titles you get to see all the bands that everybody rips off, like Sabbath 1, Black Flag.
Yeah, whatever inspired them that day. Yeah. Love that.
I mean, I'm guilty of it as well. So
of course, yeah,
no judgment here.
Well, you talked about how, like, with the albums, you'll typically listen to the whole thing and get a sense of it and kind of try to make everything. You said you'll gain stage. So if we're just talking about the stereo processing side of things, like the gain staging seems like it's your first thing. Now, I'm assuming you're just doing that so everything's at a good level, and then when you're making your EQ decisions and all that kind of stuff afterwards, you're hearing it at like mastered level sort of thing, right?
Right.
Yeah. In terms of levels, is there anywhere specific that you shoot for as far as levels? Like, I know levels are always a topic of conversation whenever it comes to mastering. So
yeah, I mean, I shoot for where it feels good. There was an interview with Paige Hamilton from Helmet, like, that I read a long time ago. Like, I think it was like when like Meantime like first hit, and he's a virtuoso guitar player, and I remember he's playing these staccato, like simplistic, like chord progressions, and I read a guitar magazine. I'm like, whoa, like this guy like is like I think he's like a jazz like trained in jazz and stuff. And they asked him, like, what's your opinion on scales? And he said, the best thing you can do with scales is learn them and then forget them. And that's kind of how I am with levels and specifics of levels. They tend to change a lot, but like, I know my meters and I know the gear along the process, what it's typically going to see, what my meters are typically going to show me when things are right. But it's at the end of the day, it's the ears. A good example though is, I don't use compression on everything, but a compressor will always tell you, a compressor is always a good indicator of level with the meters, not necessarily with like the gain reduction or like how much you're doing, but like where you have to set the threshold. If you've got a setting that always works for you, where you have to set the threshold before it starts kicking in. Like I've got a set of Dave Hill Designs Titans, and I've got a few different. There's no ratio setting on those compressors. It's like it's very kind of out there, but like there's a shape setting, and then there's the shape and the threshold are interactive. So like if I've got this shape on like 70, which is usually like going to feel like probably a 1.5 or 2-to-1 compression ratio. Like if I've got it on 70 and like my threshold is like it's compressing at like 10, like these digits don't really correspond to anything specifically, but like if it's on 10, I'm like, oh, well, usually it's going to be 15 to 20. So like, let's pull the gain down because that's how things sound. I like the way things sound better that way. My silver bullet, my louder than liftoff silver bullet is the first piece in my analog chain. It's got great metering. And I use that in a way that like, it doesn't saturate so much. It just kind of gives like a really nice analog dimension to things. And so that like, if that's getting too far, like if the meters on that are going beyond what I'm used to seeing them at, then I have to back my gain coming out of my DA converter, right? Like, this is just simple, like 101 stuff, but like, it's all workflow stuff. It's knowing the gear and knowing like how hard you can hit it. It's like a guitar amp that you have that you're like, never go past 4 on the volume, like, the 4 doesn't mean anything. It's just an indicator,
No, totally. No, but I think you're right though. And I think to people who haven't really dialed in their workflow, they might not fully understand what you're saying. And I think, the big takeaway for anyone who's listening to this, who may be like, I don't get it. It's like having consistency in your workflow is the biggest thing.
Absolutely. 100%.
When you have like your threshold, the way you said, like, that at a certain level going into it, you're going to get too much gain reduction or whatever. And that's not going to work for you. So then you can use that to reverse engineer what you got to do and make the right decisions. So exactly.
That approach can be transposed and should be transposed to working in the box as well. But it's often not because, plugins might be designed to, see a input of say -18 dBRMS or that's just throwing that out there. And you're hitting it with -6, and you might be ending up with like results that are unwanted or some that are wanted, but you don't really know, right? Like people will like use, the input gain to make up or the output gain to pull it down. But like, it's something that should be thought about in the box as well, is how hard should you hit the next piece of gear? How hard should you hit a certain piece of gear? And how hard should you hit the next one? And it's good to experiment and to have, that's why I love having an insert switcher, a mastering console here, where I don't have to move things around. I've got things kind of in an order that I like. And it's led me to know how it works and know the signal it wants to see. It's good practice in the box to have, to have a template of things that like typically work. You can have 2 compressors on there and 3 EQs, have them all bypassed, figure out which one's going to work better, but like know like what they're going to want to see as far as gain goes and as far as dynamics go.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great point. You talked about your signal flow and how you have them all in that switcher. Like, what does that typical signal flow look like for you with your mastering chain?
So the way I've got is, it's a Future Retro DB, and it's a insert switcher and monitor controller and headphone amp. It's a really cool piece of gear. It's also got summing and a bunch of stuff that I actually don't use, but like I've got 8 inserts on it. The final insert on that goes to the output. So I don't use the output on it. I use the final insert of that to my computer, to my DAW. So like basically like I come out of the computer, out of the, into the DA, into my insert switcher. I've got my silver bullet on insert 1. Insert 2, I've got a compressor. That's a Rocksonics MB3X multiband compressor. The silver bullet has an EQ on it as well. So I've got an EQ and color on the first insert, followed by a compressor if I need to compress there, followed by the massive passive, which is on insert 3, which has mid-side capability. I've got the massive passive on the same insert as an SPL stereo Q, which is an old piece of gear with gain control. Like it's a stereo EQ, but it's all, they're all controlled with the same pots, and they are mismatched. Like the channels are slightly mismatched. So I like to run that in mid-side. So that's why I've got those two in mid-side. Also, the massive passive sometimes can be like really cool in mid-side when used in the analog domain. Followed by, so I've got those two on one insert, the mid-side insert. Then insert 4, I've got 2 compressors. I've got a Foot Control Systems P3EX and a SPL Cool Tube. And when I'm doubling up on inserts, I make sure that those are true bypass, that they're completely clean, right? So that's where I've got another, so it's, you see like EQ, compressor EQ. So I can kind of choose where I want to compress and where I want to EQ. And both of those, like the Foot is a really cool, like huge transformer, like just beefy, like compressor, but doesn't work on everything. But when it does, it's awesome. And it works great on like really heavy down-tuned, slow metal. Like, the Cool Tube is a, tube-based makeup gain with some really neat attack and release controls, and input and output transformers on that as well. Insert 6, I've got my Dave Hill Design Titans, so compressors there. I'm sorry, I skipped insert 5. Insert 5 is my Dave Hill Design Titans. Insert 6, I've got the Dangerous backs with the DR-MQ5 that we were talking about, the custom built Sontec style from DIY Racked. And then finally on insert 7, I've got my modified Aphex Dominator 720, which is like one of my favorite pieces of gear. Stock, they're lousy. Like they're just grabby. Like it sounds like radio compression. It's just like this is modified per Magic Death Eye specs, heavily modified. And it's awesome. Like I use that a lot. Like sometimes it beats out, the Titans. Obviously it's in a different spot, but like, it's great. It's really fast and it kind of keeps things under control. So then back into the AD, back into the computer. And I'll usually put a low pass filter after that to kind of kill any aliasing or anything from there. And then my final limiter.
Cool. Before we were recording, we were talking about the Make Believe Studio Sontec plugin. And you mentioned that you use that all the time. So as far as incorporating, it sounds like you have a lot of analog gear in your chain, but how do you manage how do you work the analog with the digital side of things? Like what's your typical workflow look like in there? That's
a great question. So I never do multiple conversions. I always limit the conversions to one. So I won't go out of the box, back in just to hit a plugin and then go back out. What plugins like the Sontec do is they give me the ability to get everything kind of like almost perfect before it hits the analog realm. And then I might use an analog compressor or the backs in addition to it. I have the backs plug-in as well, and I always use the backs hardware. Plug-in's great, but again, there's a certain dimension that the hardware has that the plug-in doesn't. With the Sontec plugin, it's absolutely interchangeable with this custom piece, if not superior. So that kind of like minimizes my analog chain, but it keeps the workflow simple.
Gotcha. Well, earlier we were talking about how with an album, sometimes you will run into situations where songs are different from each other and that kind of thing. So when it comes to mastering an album and incorporating your analog chain into the equation, how do you go about doing that? Like, are you creating new settings for every song, or are you trying to find kind of like more of a broad stroke setting with your analog gear and then maybe relying more on digital?
Almost always broad strokes. Yeah, almost always broad strokes. For me, the analog chain is kind of the sweetening spot. It's like it's how I want it to sound. It makes it how I want it to sound. And it's the glaze. So, I use every master I have, like literally, like I swear to God, 99.99 repeating % of the masters I have a digital EQ with one, like typically 4 dB, 24 dB per octave cut somewhere in the 2.5K to 3.3K area. That area where like your ears, like it's the resonant frequency of your ears. It's like it's the range that a baby cries at, which some have theorized that it's an evolutionary thing. So like it's just that resonance. Like everybody knows what I'm talking about. It's like that really harsh like whistle. And on all of them, I'll listen for that one whistle, and it can be a game of EQ whack-a-mole sometimes. But like I'll listen for that one whistle, and I'll just pop that out. And then when I bypass it, it's like I hear it. It's like one of those little imperfections that you can notice really when it's gone. So I'll do that work in the box, and then like corrective stuff. That's all. It's better for me to do that in the box. Because the analog stuff for me is more about broad strokes. One, like the game changer, there's a couple of game changers for my workflow regarding like mixes that are different. At times bands want that. And when they want that, that's fine. I will give them different EQ curves digitally, maybe, shelving EQs are great for this, but when a band wants to match things, I can't stress enough how incredible Isotope RX advanced the EQ match function on that is. It blows me away every time I use it. You got to be careful with it. And what's the most important function on that is the blend, is like how much you're using. Because you can match something and like be like, oh my man, like it sounds like perfect, but all of a sudden a guitar solo's gone. It'll do some weird stuff if you're not careful. But that and the loudness match when used properly, like can really, really help before the mastering stage. It's incredible. It's really incredible what those can do.
Yeah, great. Yeah, RX is amazing, and there's so much good stuff in there.
It's probably my favorite piece of software ever.
Yeah,
no joke.
I put it off for so long, and then once I got it, I was like, how did I live without this? It's so powerful.
I just did a record where everything, like they had stick clicks, over guitar parts or over feedback or something at starting the songs, and they were like, we wanted to remove those in the mix, and we forgot, and I was able to remove them entirely. I mean, it takes some work. You have to use like the lasso feature, and you have to look and really find it, and you have to do multiple passes, but it's crazy. I'll remove phantom click tracks all the time, I mean, I'll do that and not even say anything to the band, or like bad edits. It's great for like those little clicks that when somebody edits off a zero crossing and it's got that like pop, that just pokes out.
Yeah.
Zap it. It's fantastic.
But that's the mark of a good mastering engineer. They can pick up on all those little details, because the fact that you got the tracks with all those clicks and pops and stuff like that, like the band probably didn't even notice that they're in there,
Yeah. I mean,
But then there's someone else who's going to listen to it and notice it for sure.
It always bums me out when they notice it and I don't. And I'm like, and like, I have to kind of walk the line there and, just say like, okay, I'll take care of it, like, not just like it's in the mix. That wasn't me. Like that's bedside manner, basic bedside manner etiquette. Like, like, okay, yeah, let's take care of that. Like, yeah.
Yeah. Well, another question that I had for you regarding albums is maybe more of like a modern day issue, which is that these days it seems like a lot of artists are recording and releasing singles, and they'll get like one song mastered at a time, and then they'll release like a bunch of different singles. And then eventually they're like, hey, we should put all these songs together and make an album out of these previously mastered songs. And I'm curious to learn about your approach to mastering records like that. Like, do you go back and are you remastering these projects? Or are you like, how do you approach projects that come to you like that?
That's a really good question. And it does happen a lot these days, because people, they don't necessarily book a week of studio time to write a record. They're just like, we've got this song, let's go, record it. We've got this song, let's go record it. Fortunately, like recall, like when that's done, those typically tend to be like in the box mixes, and recall is great. It's the tracking that gets you, a different guitar amp or a different mic or different mic placement, different temperature in the room, one extra person in the room, especially if you're talking like recording in a small basement studio, you've got your singer there. He was, or she wanted to show up that day, like that'll make a difference. And so what I usually do is the easy thing to do would be just master the songs as they go and then put them all together when it's time. I don't do that because that's partially because I'm kind of meticulous about everything being captured through my analog stuff, at the same time, like capturing a moment, I use Session Recall. It's the name of the software, is Session Recall. And it's fantastic because everything I do, I've got all of my gear in there, and everything I do is notated. So I can pull that all back up and rerun it. And then Metric AB by Adapter Audio, absolute, like just, it's indispensable to me because it will tell me like if something is, off, or like if I recorded a setting wrong or something, the calibration's off. Plugin Doctor as well, like I mentioned earlier, but Metric AB is great because it allows me to make sure that running this song that I've already mastered through this chain that I already created again is going to be, a one-to-one, recreation. There's not going to be anything different there. That's just, God, it's huge. And it's really good. Metric AB is really good for me to find like plugin bugs too. Like recently, the UAD MDW EQ, which I used until recently because of this bug. Like I was like pulling up old, like I was doing revisions and pulling up, putting I do like V1A and V1B, 2 passes initially. They decide where to go. If there's a revision, they want to do V1B. So I start V12. I load V1B into Metric AB, and I'm like, what the hell? Like there's no low end, and the volume is just checking all my analog stuff. And then I look and I find that like the MDW EQ has like turned a -4 dB cut at 2.7 into a -4 dB low shelf at 2.7. That's not good. Like that's like, you're cutting like that. It's like, whoa, what the hell? And it was just randomly doing that on recall. It was when they ported the VST3. Fortunately, Metric Halo just released the Sonic EQ, which is fantastic. And so I've been using that instead, and it's rock solid. There's only a couple of digital EQs I've used that have had that kind of resolution and accuracy. And the Sonic EQ is one of them, and it'll do even tighter cuts than the Massenburg.
Very, very cool. I've always been a massive fan of Metric AB, and I've talked about it so many times on this podcast. It's my favorite plugin of all time. Like to me, it's such an indispensable tool. But that's a really cool way to use it. I never thought about it that way, but you're absolutely right.
And it also, I use it for the mixes too. Like I'll line it up with the mix, and then the volume match on it is great. So I can, if somebody's totally happy with the mix and they want a very transparent mastering approach, I mean, I can get it. I'll close my eyes and just sit there hitting the button. And I'm like, okay, I'm not noticing that nothing's jumping out at me. I can tell which one's mine because it might not have that, that whistle up there that I cut. But like, it can tell me if I've gone too far or if I've really screwed up. But yeah, that's fantastic. That's so like, I was talking like I've got my templates set up. When I open a new project, it pulls up a template. It's got, it's got my gain knob. I use PreSonus Studio One for my main DAW. So I've got it's mix tool, which is just gain, followed by my EQ, sonic EQ, followed by the pipeline, which is, the in and out, followed by my low pass, and then a limiter. And then on the meter side of things, I've got metric AB, Boxingo span, and the Brainworks meter. But then I've also got this PC Electronic Clarity, which is awesome. Like, I think I use that more for loudness monitoring than
I just purchased one of those M Clarity or Clarity M's like this week. I got it used from someone and then it died. Like,
no, really?
Yeah, like I unplugged it to like move it on my desk and something fried on the screen. So it sucks. So now it's in the shop, but I'm gonna get it back. They're pretty cool though.
Cool, that's good. Yeah, I use the AES in on that too. Like, so, I don't have to have a plugin running. It's just I just have an AES coming out of my monitoring DA. So
makes sense. Right on. Well, I'd love to dive into some projects that you've worked on. And one project that I was particularly interested in was Dopesmoker by Sleep. And I'm sure you've got that a bunch because it's such an interesting concept. It's like for people who aren't familiar with it, it's like one song that's like an hour long, a little over an hour. And so I'm curious to know, like, when it comes to mastering a song like that, how does that differ from like maybe mastering a record, if at all?
Honestly, it doesn't. But like, that was a long time ago for me now. And that record did a lot for me because like that was the remaster that Southern Lord put out. And Greg Anderson from Southern Lord and Son is a really good friend of mine. And he really helped me when I was getting started out. And he gave me that job in the High on Fire record around the same time. And I was just like, you're too kind. Like, this is awesome. I turned in the master for that the week that I got let go from a job that I had for like 7 years and found out I was going to have a kid the same week. And I'm like,
eventful week,
all in 1 week. And I'm like, all right, well, I guess it's time, and then I've just been doing it full time ever since. But like, it's really not that much of a different approach for me. I still get like, I'll get jobs that are like, 45 minutes long and there's 4 songs. So, it's consistency is there. And there's also so many like kind of movements in that record that it's almost like it could be almost like several different songs that flow together. But yeah, that one was fun. It took me a long time because where I was at, like in that stage of the process, of like, okay, I need to like get this perfect. And I was just like getting like, just, having like listening, changing things here and there until I felt like everything was kind of in tune and harmonizing, where I'd like felt this, like where I felt vibrations, like in the desk and the seat, like that were harmonizing with the music. It was like, that's how it went. I was just talking to Ryan from Make Believe the other day. That's like, he was saying that's what Rick from Make Believe, Rick Carson, does, is like he can gauge low end by like how he feels in his seat. And I think that's really cool, so like I owe that mention to him. But like, it's just, that's the process with that was just like, okay, how can I make this sound a little better?
Yeah. So as far as like with a track like that is so long, and like you're right, there are like different sections to the song that you could treat like a different song. Like, did you feel like taking advantage of like clip editing and like cutting things into little clips to like make each section of the song different, or was it pretty much one setting from beginning to end?
Just run it. Yep. One setting. Like, yeah. I remember I used the Waves linear phase multiband compressor on that one. That's one of the few Waves plugins that I actually still use, and I had used that back then. That and like, I think there was like, I feel like there was a Pultec plugin on there, maybe the PSD Noble Q or something like that. But yeah,
very cool.
Yeah, just kind of go down and listen to it. I had my studio was in the basement at the time,
It's a long, sludgy song, so it kind of makes sense that it would all be the same
Yeah.
anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. And I would like, that was back in the day. Like I would put it on, I would like listen to it, load it on my iPod, and then go out and do yard work and listen and be like, okay, like, I think maybe I'll change this or something. It's like multiple environment approach there to mastering. I was, like I said, I was working out in my basement at the time. It was a very improvised space, but I managed to make it work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that brings up an interesting topic too, which is that idea of translation. And obviously, like, translation is critical in the mastering stage. So what kind of steps are you taking to ensure that the tracks that you master sound just as good outside of your studio as they do in? Like, are you just listening on a lot of different devices, or?
No, because at this point I've done enough that I know how things are going to translate. But I also, client feedback is key. You know what I'm saying? Like, I might be the expert here, but I'm going to rely on people to tell me, like, hey, this is too boomy in my car. And I'm going to say, well, what's your car? And they're going to say it's a 2020 RAV4 or something. Like, I'm like, oh, well, modern stereos are very bass heavy and boomy. Like, go listen to an old, 80s Corolla or something. But like, no, seriously though, like, client feedback is key, right? Like I have a little PDF that I send with the masters that say, listen to this in multiple environments, like see how it sounds. You want it to be consistent, but also like my monitoring situation in my room, the acoustic treatment in my room is dialed into an extent that I know that things are going to translate when I work, right? Or maybe they might not sound so great on one system. It might be the flaw of the system, or maybe I need to turn the low end down a little bit, but like, it's really just kind of knowing your room, knowing your monitoring situation very well. It can't be taught. It has to be just, you have to spend time with it.
Totally. Well, it's like you mentioned too, with like feeling that low end in your room, right? It's like, right, once you learn what that feels like, your body has a reaction when you hit the right spot with it.
Yeah. And it's, for a long time, like I would sit down. So I've got, my chair is in the middle of the room and my couch is on the back. So I would print masters and I would go sit down and I'd be like, oh, whoa, the low end is a little out of control. And I'd sit back in the chair and I'm like, oh, there's a big buildup in the back of the room where you would expect the low end to be built up right there, having a sub in my room, honestly, it might be a bit unconventional in mastering, but like having a sub really does help me as well. And I would recommend that to a lot of people, like maybe look into getting a sub to like know what your low end is doing. A lot of mixing environments are smaller rooms where low end will build up, and a sub might not be the best thing, or maybe you can actually like use that to your advantage to like understand how the low end is building up in your room. But that's an area where like it's not really, I think usually like the translation thing is a lot of times that's going to be in the low end, and it's a bandwidth issue, right? Like you're loading the van. If your bass player's bringing 2 SVT cabinets, then you're not going to be bringing your full stack, and so like it's bandwidth, and that's where certain systems will struggle with low end just hogging up everything or distorting. So like getting that low end under control is critical. It's kind of like the two ends of the spectrum, high end as well, and mid range, all of it.
It's all important.
It's just knowing. It's really just knowing your listening environment and turning things up on occasion. Like I don't master things at super high volumes, but like a good like turn up every now and then to see how things are sounding when they do get turned up is handy. If you turn something up and you're like, oh shit, like, whoa, let's pop that down. Like, oh God, like maybe you need to like, focus on some high mids, the presence area or something, where those kind of start dominating in that region.
Absolutely. Yeah. I was actually curious to know about that. Like if you master at a consistent level every time too? Because it seems like you're a pretty consistent guy with your workflow. So I was curious about
I
that
do.
part.
And
Yeah.
again, like the Future Retro DB, the monitor controller has its steps. So it's got what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 positions, right? And so, you know, I've got that fed by the dangerous source, or feeding the dangerous source, so I can control things. I can fine tune things a little bit more, but I keep that really where it is, and I usually keep this on the -6 setting. I mean, and I set that with Remy Q Wizard when I do the acoustic shoots in my room, which I do about every couple months, just to make sure everything's looking good. I want it to be kind of, just as flat as possible.
Very cool. I love how you rely on your technology for like Rumi Q Wizard and Metric AB and all that kind of stuff. And you were talking before we recorded about how you check in Plugin Doctor to make sure your analog gear is all calibrated properly all the time. Like it's very interesting and something a lot of people don't talk about, but it makes sense that like if you want that consistency, you have to.
Never turn your back on digital. That's what the old adage was. But like also like just know your gear and know expect it to go wrong. That's why you've got indicators. That's why you've got an oil light on your car. That's why you can learn to feel things, but like you do have indicators that are going to tell you, and use those indicators. They're there.
Yeah, makes sense. Right on. Well, another project that I wanted to ask you about was you got to work on the Stranger Things soundtrack as well, which is pretty cool. I'm curious to know, like, what was it like working on that project, and how was that different than some of the other projects you've worked on in the past?
So that was another one that I'm lucky, like I work hard, I work my ass off, but I'm fortunate to have been sent certain projects, and that's one of them, and whether it's that or somebody's demo, it's like, it doesn't affect how hard I'm going to work on it, So that one was cool because I had done those guys are in a band called Survive, who did a record on Relapse, and I do a lot of work for Relapse. And I did the Survive record, and they were happy with it. And, one day I'm working and I see a single song get booked. I get an email notification for that. I'm like, okay, let's see what this is. And I'm like, it says this is for a TV show being developed by Netflix starring Winona Ryder. And I'm like, whoa, what? It was for the title sequence. Yeah. So that was the first thing I did, was the title sequence for that. And so I'm sitting here like, whoa, man, like, wow, like I've got knowledge that's like, I'm privy to knowledge that like is not out there. This is really cool. And I wasn't saying anything to anybody about it, and I'm like, okay, awesome. And like those guys are really, they have great ears. They're really tuned, like they're dialed into what they want to do and what they are expecting and stuff. So they kind of gave me some direction to begin with. And I think I did like a couple passes on that, and it was, they were happy with it, and I was happy with it. I thought it sounded great. And then when it was time to do, the soundtrack, the original soundtrack, all that stuff, I again used like the basic template, and then with changes to the songs here and there. When you're dealing with like a soundtrack that has like 30 songs or something, it's sometimes like it's a race against the clock. If you're taking that long, you might end up with aural fatigue, or like your ears, you might lose perspective too fast. So sometimes it's definitely better to start with the broad strokes and then kind of whittle it down from there based on client feedback or based on your own, what you notice. Like when I'm printing things, I always listen when I'm printing, even if I'm printing something in the box that's all digital, I'll print it in real time. And then if I notice something on one song, I'll make a note of it and then go back and check that. So that was, again, it was based all on kind of how I approached that title sequence and then went from there.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And you're right. Like absolutely. When you have, that many songs to put together, it can definitely present a challenge of making sure everything is consistent, but also not burning yourself out in that process too.
And I've been doing I love working on that kind of stuff. Like it's just, I've been doing a lot more of that type stuff. Jonathan Van Vindergarten, probably butchered his name, from from the Netherlands who does a lot of video game soundtracks for Vertigo games. And it's, similar stuff like synth based, lots of dynamics, like I remember when I was doing this, I think season 2, I screwed up on like the first pass of that one. And I slammed it. Like, it was just like, it was one of those things that I just felt really like ruined my week. I was just like, God, what the hell did I do? Like, why did I do that? And, it was like, okay, shit, pulled it back, but like knowing kind of the expectation, knowing that stuff like that doesn't work well when there's not the dynamic range there. But I love working on like electronic music and synth based stuff because, a lot of times you don't have a singer who, like wants, there's that one lyric part right there that's getting buried, or like, you don't have so much transient content, or but like most of the music I work on being like, heavier stuff, it's actually really hard to work to master. Like, it's really difficult. Like, it might have been recorded in a challenging situation, or you've just got so much stuff going on and it's really dense and really fast. The drummer wants a kick drum that sounds like John Bonham, but there's no room for those transients to develop. So that stuff for me is like, I love working on it because I'm like, it's just, it's fun. Like, I love working on all the stuff I do, but like whenever something comes that's like a breath, a change of pace, not necessarily a breath of fresh air, but like a change of pace, like a country record. I do country records. I did a David Crosby record, like it's, when I do things like that, it's like, it's cool. It's fun. And I feel like I'm just as good at that, if not better, because at the end of the day, it's all spectral content, spectral and transient content,
Yeah.
Got to make it all work.
Absolutely.
And like in my record collection at home, I mean, I listen to all sorts of different music. I mean, I listen to punk and hardcore, but I listen to like rock, like classic rock and blues and old country and even some like disco, it's just like being being tuned into music in general and not just focusing on genres is very important, I think.
I agree with that. So then at the end of the day, for you, regardless of the genre, like what ultimately makes a great master?
Is it what the band envisioned? Is it something that they will cherish and not, I call it lamentia. When it's like when you lament things, it's a made up word, but lamentia is like common with recordings. Like, God, I wish we would have done that. Like there's a record I did where I'm like, I wish this space between these two songs was shorter. And it still drives me crazy to this day. So, are there things that you, maybe not performance related, but like just, are you going to want to listen to your own record? Without being like, oh man, I can't listen to that. It's just like it was ruined in mastering or something. But like what makes a great master is like, do people enjoy it? Does it sound good? Does it turn up well? Is everything balanced? Do people not have to adjust the EQ on their stereo just to play that record? Like, oh yeah, put that record. If you're going to put that record on, pull the bass slider down all the way. Was it cut to vinyl well? Is there enough time being given, like thought being given to the time of the record so that it's not cut so quietly that it raises the noise floor? That's one thing that people seldomly think about when they're pressing to vinyl, is that it's a physical medium and there's only room for so many of those grooves to go as deep as they can. And when you've got like a 25-minute record, you've got to make sacrifices there in volume and low end. You can't have everything. So you end up like having to turn one record up way higher than the 45 RPM dance single you were just listening to, and the noise floor comes up with it. So what makes a good master is like, is it enjoyable without any moves needed by the listener?
Love that. Yeah, I think that's a very thorough answer for that, and it makes sense. And yeah, at the end of the day, the mastering engineer is that last step between the band recording these songs and the audience listening to them, in many ways. And so we have to make sure that people are going to enjoy it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Brad, this has been awesome. Like I've really enjoyed learning more about your process, and you're very thorough with everything you do. And
Thank you so much.
and it's been really fascinating to learn more about. And now you've got me thinking about so many things I want to do with Metric AB now. So,
Oh yeah,
but
that man. Yeah, hopefully I didn't ramble too much. And
no, it's all
also
good.
like keep an eye out. There's a new plugin coming out really soon. It's red and it's awesome.
All right. I feel like
All
I know
right,
which one you're talking about, but
I'll tell you this. There's a plugin coming out really soon that like there's an obscure older like turn of the like 2000, 99, 2000s era piece of digital hardware. It was a digital, it's like a plugin in a box that I have searched for years and never found. And it only does 44.1 and 48. It doesn't go up to 96. And I work at 96, but I wanted it so bad. I was like, I need it. I was looking, and there's a plugin coming out that it's in the final part of the beta process right now. I've been working with it and it's blowing me away. And it's the plugin version of that. It nulls to negative 100 dB. It's like, oh, it's so awesome. So watch for that. It's
we'll watch for
red
that for sure.
and it's a rectangle.
Ooh. Right on, man. Well, Brad, if people want to learn more about you, maybe even work with you, follow you online, what's the best way for them to do that?
Email. I am slow to get back with on email. Sometimes I try not to like take more than 2 or 3 days, but like really I get to work and I work, and then I try to like stay up on emails. I try to keep my flagged emails under a certain number. But email is the best. So if somebody wants to book mastering, I have kind of like your form when we did this, I have it all on the website. So all the information, prices, availability, all that is on the website. Like if you go to audiosiege.com and you're curious about my availability, just click on the schedule mastering link and that will take you to a calendar that's current and shows the available spots, shows the prices, all that stuff. If anybody has questions, so they can just email me, brad@audiosiege.com, or the email address on the website. I tend to get inbox overload. So sometimes like, Facebook or Instagram messages, like I just don't see them, or like it's too much for me, like for my old brain, But yeah, that's usually the best way is email.
Right on, man. Dude, thanks again for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I am honored. Like this is awesome. I've really enjoyed it. And like I said, hopefully I made sense in my ramblings. I tend to be long.
It was great, man.
Esoteric sometimes.
Yeah, it's all good. So that was my interview with Brad Boatright, and I really enjoyed that. I thought that he covered a lot of really great stuff in there. I really liked how he was talking about just being consistent with your process, and how when you have consistency, just a simple look at your meters can sometimes indicate when something is wrong or how to fix something. There's a lot of power in consistency. So I love that he talked about that and how, he works with his templates for this stuff. And also, I really enjoyed getting into the process of how he incorporates his analog chain in with his digital side of things and making sure that everything's calibrated. I love that he talked about using Metric AB. That is my favorite plugin of all time. And I think Brad just made me even more of a fan in this episode because he made me think of ways to use it that I'd never even thought of before. So very, very cool. Always great to learn more about people's processes and the different tools that they like to use for this kind of stuff. And lastly, I also really enjoyed talking about the concept of working on albums as opposed to singles, and how there are a lot of different challenges that go along with that. And so it's always great to learn more about how people approach the album making process when it comes to mastering, and what kind of details they're listening for between the songs, and how to make sure that you have consistency, especially when you have songs that have maybe been previously mastered or songs that have been mixed by different engineers and all that kind of stuff. So I thought it was really cool to learn more about Brad's process there and what he's listening for and how it all comes together for him. So with that said, I really enjoyed this episode, and I hope that you did too. If you did, please make sure to subscribe to the podcast. That way you're notified about all new episodes as they go live each and every Wednesday morning. And lastly, if you're someone who's looking for help with your music production, if you're feeling like your mixes have hit a plateau, you're stuck, you're not sure what you need to do in order to get the sounds that you hear in your head to come out of your speakers, and to ultimately make music that excites you and that feels as professional as you expect it to. Well, if you're looking for help, then I'd absolutely love to help you. And inside of my program, Amplitude, that is exactly what I do. And inside of that program, I work one-on-one with my students to help make sure that they're doing all of the steps needed in order to get pro results. And within this program, we're focusing on covering every step along the way with the recording, editing, and mixing process. And you're completely supported throughout the entire process, getting feedback all along the way. You can submit your recordings, you can submit your edits and your mixes. And then based on that, we provide you with all sorts of video feedback to help make sure that you're getting the results you wanted. So if you're interested in learning more about this program, make sure to visit masteryourmix.com/amplitude, and you can find all the details on that page there. And then I'd love to hop on a call with you, learn more about your goals, learn more about your current process to see where I can truly help you. And if it seems like you'd be a good fit and that we could truly help you inside of this program, then I'd love to share all the details with you and have you join us inside. So once again, make sure to visit masteryourmix.com/amplitude, and you can find all the details there. And with that said, we've reached the end of this episode. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end, and I can't wait to chat with you in the next one. We'll talk soon. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Master Your Mix podcast. To have your questions answered, submit your questions to questions@masteryourmix.com. Please go to iTunes and subscribe and leave a review. And for more information on how you can improve your mixes, visit masteryourmix.com.